This is the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be going to the Alcoholics Anonymous book and starting in on Chapter 2, titled There is a Solution. My intention with the next few episodes here is to provide both those struggling with alcoholism and addiction, as well as loved ones of those struggling, a glimmer of hope. And that's why I feel the need to dive into this chapter, read through it, and specifically highlight and overlay sections of this story with my own story to connect those, again, both struggling and the loved ones of those struggling, with the fact that all of us start from the same bottom, from a very similar situation, despite our vast backgrounds and experiences and life's journeys up to that point. The one thing that we all have in common as addicts and alcoholics is the low point and the things that have brought us there. So with that, I will get to the book. Chapter 2, There is a Solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupants are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. I want to pause there and just make a comment about it, because in the communities that I've surrounded myself in the world of recovery, the two that are most obvious and stand out are with the core group of folks that I went through rehab with, as well as my morning AA meeting that I attend. And just as this passage calls out, the backgrounds are incredibly vast and different, yet there's this common bond that ties us all together. And the way that I love to think about it and look at it is, it's very interesting if you drive up to an AA meeting and just take a moment and sit in the parking lot or parking space before you go in and just look around and realize that the vehicles there representing the people that are there are just incredibly different. And I mean, that's, for me, that's just like a really visual way of drawing out the fact that alcoholism knows no constraints and no bounds. And so just because you're quote unquote successful, as our society deems it, doesn't hold you back from being afflicted by this illness. And so it's really incredible to experience a group that from the outside looking in, you wouldn't expect much cohesion, much unity. But then you step into those rooms, and even if you're not a part of AA, if you found yourself a community that guides and supports you in your journey of recovery, I guarantee you will find the exact same thing. Everything else drops away and the focus just turns intensely towards everyone's suffering, but everyone's adherence to the journey and sticking on the road of recovery. So back to the book. We are like the passengers of a great liner, the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out of which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all those whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase a list. I want to pause from the book here and just highlight that section because as I've thought and reflected on it, and just why is it that alcoholism, why is it that addiction has such a stigma about it? I think this section really highlights some of those key aspects and reasons, at least in my mind. Many times with other illnesses, it's viewed as more genuine, generally speaking, more or less a blameless incident or coming of for the person who is suffering. And I think you could argue the same for alcoholism, especially, with individuals who are more or less born with the disease. But I think the bigger aspect and reason that it is such a stigma has to do with what this section highlights with regards to the ramifications of the disease. Alcoholism and addiction just tramples relationships and destroys lives of the sufferer. And it is just introduces so much chaos and hurt and pain and suffering into the lives of those around the alcoholic that I think it is largely driven it to be such a shameful disease and one that needs to be hidden and one that we feel like we cannot talk about. But it is very interesting to think of it in these terms, in this perspective of an illness or disease, where in other aspects, when someone becomes sick, the destructiveness does not generally get introduced to a life. So, going back to the book, we hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. I'll pause there and just highlight, this is again the two paragraphs that I covered extensively in the previous podcast, but this section, these 2 paragraphs of this chapter are more or less the reason that Chapter 3 Stigma exists, and why also Chapter 3 Stigma is resonating with individuals. Again, in my story, I met with and fired numerous therapists, psychologists, or psychiatrists in my journey, and I really just spoon fed them what they wanted to hear, because I felt like I had no connection with them. And family, parents, my wife would approach me about it, and I would just push them away, and I would isolate more. It was extremely difficult to open up to anybody who didn't understand, who didn't know the suffering. This is so difficult to explain to someone who is not afflicted with the battle with alcoholism, and just it's nearly impossible to explain how your body gets taken over and hijacked even from the very first drink, and how you obsessively focus and figure out ways to manipulate to meet your desire, and just to stop all the chaos and the anguish that's going on inside of you. Those details, I'm not even really getting into detail there, but those aspects of the disease make the alcoholic, when approached by someone who is not afflicted, feel absolutely crazy and out of their minds. And again, it just leads to shelling up and isolating even further. But sitting across the table or listening to someone who obviously knows what you are going through as an addict, as an alcoholic, and you can hear it in their voice, and you can hear it in their story, and it inspires hope, and it makes you feel like you are not crazy, like you are not alone. That is the power of groups like AA, of surrounding yourself with a community that is focused entirely on your adherence to a life in active recovery. So with that, I'll go back to the book. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. So I'm going to pause here and just, I covered this a little bit already, but really want to highlight the fact that engaging with someone, engaging with a group who have obviously traveled not the exact same storyline, but the same path of suffering and digging your hole, and to see people that are smiling, that are laughing, that are joyous in life, and then to find out that they still suffer, that they don't view themselves as not an alcoholic anymore, but they view their alcoholism in a light that is full of gratitude and grace, is, for the alcoholic who is still suffering, the most motivating and hope-inspiring thing that they can inject into their lives. Back to the book. None of us makes a sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. If you are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. If we keep on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by, hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? I'm going to pause there really quick and just note that as I have opened up and the more that I open up, the more that I am discovering people living around me, people within my life, I guess, sphere, are also either struggling themselves or have, specifically taken breaks and stepped away from alcohol. And it's just really incredible and interesting to discover in that regard. And it, what I have found is it enriches the relationship when you figure out that bond, even though the vast majority of individuals that I know that I'm referencing do not go to AA. Many of them actually are not even alcoholics. They have just found the incredible benefits of removing alcohol and other substances from their lives. And that right there is a shared bond and a shared experience. And I've discovered incredibly enriched and deepening of relationships just around that fact alone. And we kind of have these discussions about, isn't it amazing how great life is? So with that, back to the book. We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. I'm going to pause right there just to say, again, the incredible aspect of the communities that I have found myself in that I really value for keeping me on the road of active recovery in my life. Our belief systems are vastly different. Yet we can set those aside on a daily basis and work together and be there for each other and love each other and have respect for each other and respect our differences, because this common bond that we share of our suffering and struggle with alcoholism is so strong that it dwarfs any other differences that we experience or that we see in our lives. And we can be forgiving of each other because we know and we have shown each other that we are at the core human. And what that means is that we are flawed. So with that, back to the book. You may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us become so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. And at that point, I'm going to end this podcast for the week. Again, my desire with these next few episodes, and I guess you could say broadly with this project, is to start by inspiring hope. Hope for the alcoholic, hope for the loved one of the addict or alcoholic. There is a solution, and it is available. It is readily available to anyone who wants it. That's all I've got for this week. Love to y'all. Thank you. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time.